Hello again. This is our final installment of the New Testament versus mythology claim, that the New Testament presents itself as something that happened in real time, real people, real events, in a real time period. Real, I mean that actually happened as they were described in the Bible, and how important it is that you have a belief that matches the historicity. Think again, Paul in 1 Corinthians, that magnificent chapter, 1 Corinthians 15, and that magnificent letter, that book to the early Christians in Corinth, him saying that, okay, if Jesus didn't rise in three-dimensional space-time out of that grave to justify his claims of divinity, then we're people to be pitied the most. We should eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. So there's Paul saying, part of this, as I checked my message against the other tradiants that were eyewitnesses to the living, breathing, walking Jesus and his resurrected self, that this is something very, very important, because why you need this, the historicity matters. That he didn't just rise existentially, he didn't just rise spiritually, he didn't rise in some sort of vapor scenario that wasn't necessarily readily available to people and had to be supported by some sort of wish fulfillment hallucination. We can talk about hallucinations in the future as well, but instead, this is something that happened in real time. As you know, anybody familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses will know this is one of their claims as well, that it wasn't a true bodily resurrection in space-time. So we're on our way to the last session here. There's so much more to be said about the Bible versus mythology. You can find many, many different publications, but this is the best way I can do a short hit. So let's look at this one. Jesus does not treat the Old Testament as mythical. Jesus treats the Bible as historical and authoritative. So even the most difficult to believe Old Testament characters and events, Jesus affirmed publicly, like Jonah, Adam and Eve, the flood, King David wrote Psalm 110, but you see his reference to Jonah as a real historic figure in Matthew 12:40. Adam and Eve as real historic figures in Matthew 19:4. The flood is a real historic event in Matthew 24:38 through 39. And the idea that King David wrote Psalm 110 in Matthew 22:41 through 46. You also have other references there as well that you can see on the screen. Now, this doesn't necessarily deal with specifically the New Testament, but notice the way Jesus, because this will be a setup for our future installments as well, notice the way Jesus is treating the Old Testament and the miraculous parts of it. He doesn't shy away. It doesn't look like he's accommodating the ignorance of the time period, though revelation is given as people can handle it. Jesus is very, very strategic in the way he doles out information about his identity. You know, you have this messianic secret motif going on in Mark that you see not as prominent in some of the other gospels, but he's very, very circumspect about how he delivers messages about his divinity and about who he is, usually letting the miracles speak for themselves, and especially in a Jewish context. Again, every miracle was saying something to devout Jews that had memorized large portions of the Old Testament, if not most, if not all, the Torah in their education. So again, why is this important? This is a setup for future, and to let you know that Jesus didn't tend to treat what was considered authoritative, inscripturated, inspired Word of God in the Old Testament. Even if you just think he took the Torah only seriously, which I don't think you can sustain, given his penchant for quoting the wisdom literature and the Psalms. But be that as it may, the idea here is that Jesus himself, arguably the most influential and powerful, not in the worldly way, but more powerful men who have ever lived, or influential figures has ever lived, did not soft pedal the historicity of certain events expressed or recorded in the Old Testament data. He treated them as if they were real space-time events with real practical application that he could direct toward people when he addressed these sort of things and made his way through Galilee and through both synagogue and outdoor preaching as well, like the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus doesn't treat the Old Testament as mythical. Jesus treated the Bible as both historical and authoritative, and that's important for us for setting up in the future, talking about Old Testament mythology, and even a future subcategory of the mythology claim, that's the copycat, borrowing, or parallelism claim. Last but not least, let's look at a luminary in the 20th century, Albert Einstein, and listen to what he had to say. Einstein went out of his way to say that he was not an atheist by any stretch of the imagination. But he probably was some version of a theist or some kind of pantheist. But I wanted you to hear what he had to say, though not an expert and didn't spend his time. He spent his time analyzing different things for the natural order. But I wanted you to hear what he had to say about people that come to this common university, i.e., and/or internet kind of amateur critic conclusion about the New Testament. And we'll get into what the sophisticated skeptics say as well. They have a lot of disdain for certain types of mythology claims about the New Testament, especially the parallelism of borrowing. But listen to what Einstein had to say about people that come to this conclusion. As a child, I received instruction both in the Bible and the Talmud. I am a Jew, but I'm enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. Love that. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. How different, for instance, is the impression which we receive from an account of legendary heroes of antiquity like Theseus. Theseus and other heroes of his type lack the authentic vitality of Jesus. Now, this was an existential turn he was making, very interesting for a person who never quite came all the way to Christianity. But notice Einstein saying, look, I've read ancient mythology. There's a significant difference in the way the Gospels hit you existentially. And that probably had a lot to do with the fact that the luminous Nazarene could be felt through the pages in a way unlike other hero figures that have been divinized, like Theseus or Zalmoxis or Mithras or Horus or any of these ancient, Hercules, Thor, Balder, Zoroaster. You have these over and over again, and he's saying there's something different there. I hope these are helpful for you. This closes out our series. We'll do some more of the short form stuff in the future, but have a good one, and we hope to see you soon.